Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are. My name is Mike Fry, and I'm with No Kill Learning, and I'm really excited to be here today with an amazing group of people who are going to share their homes, their offices, and their experience with you over the next couple of hours for the first of a kind event. Like never before have we done anything like this, so bear with us. We're working with some brand new technology, Google Hangouts. And we've never done this before. So one of the first things I have to share with you is I guarantee you there's going to be technical mix-ups today. It's not going to be perfectly smooth. None of us are professional television broadcasters, but we've got a lot of great information to share. Also, since we're coming to you from our homes and our offices, and we all have a lot of pets, I can pretty much guarantee that we're going to be face-bombed and audio-bombed by barking dogs, cats that are going to run across our desks, and you're just hopefully going to roll with it through the whole process. It's going to be fun, I promise. And also wanted to say, before I get to introducing our guests, the presentation today is going to be broken up into different sections or segments, and at the end of each segment we're going to have live questions and answer period. So if you have questions for our guests, all you have to do is call 877-799-9951 and press option 1. We have a live operator standing by who will take your questions, and at the end of each segment, we will go ahead and present those questions to you. It's going to be tons of fun. First up, I would like to just go ahead and tell you who you're going to see today. First on my list, in no particular order, we have Robert Cabral. Sorry if I messed up your name. He's the founder of Bound Angels, and he's an author and advocate, and he's going to be talking about temperament testing. I'm actually being interviewed by Peter Maslock from No Kill Allegheny County, the Allegheny County shelter there, and Peter is joining us from Allegheny, Maryland. Also, we're going to be seeing and hearing from Kelly Jedlichky from No Kill Shelby, what is it? Kentucky Pets Alive, that's what it is. She's the executive director there, and there's Deacon there on her lap. She's an amazing gal. I can't wait to hear from her. Also with us today, we've got Gina Knepp from the City of Sacramento Front Street Animal Shelter. They've been getting a lot of press over the last couple of years about some dramatic changes and what I will call a revolution in progress. And she's going to have some very interesting information to share. Also from Front Street, we have Susie Springsteen-Marks, and she's going to be taking us through some of the nitty-gritty details of that revolution in process, and can't wait for them to share their information. Also have to say a special thank you to Beth Nelson, former producer and co-host of Animal Wise Radio and dear friend of mine. I'm so thrilled that she's going to be able to join us today and share some exciting news about developments in Minnesota, and maybe digest some things going on in Maricopa County that are maybe not so thrilling. Also on our guest list from Maricopa County is Karen Duran, who's going to be sharing some information about and talking about leadership and thinking out of the box as we select our leaders. So going to be a fun time, lots of good information, and really just can't wait to get to it. And again, remember, if you've got questions for any of our speakers or their guests, the phone number to call is 877-799-9951. Press option 1, and that is toll free. So 877-799-9951. Well, first up, is someone I consider to be not just an amazing person in all kinds of ways. She's the head of Kentucky Pets Alive. For her day job, she works with pediatric hospice work. Her name is Kelly Jedlichky, and we've done a lot of work together, in different capacities over the years. And the thing that always inspires me about Kelly is that she has this way of expanding the definition of what some shelters would consider savable, because she works with hospice dying babies, human babies. So she's taken that knowledge and applied it to rescue work in some amazing ways. And so first up, I would like to present to everybody Kelly Jedlichky from Kentucky Pets Alive. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike said, by day I'm a nurse practitioner. I do work with pediatric hospice kids. Background has been pediatric critical care, so nursing for 30 plus years. About 10 years ago I started into this hobby, which has now consumed the majority of my life. Initially started with Shelby County No-Kill Mission, where we took a kill shelter and assisted the county into making it a no-kill, and maintain no-kill status in this first county shelter in Kentucky for 6 years until leadership changes, and we left because we agreed to disagree. And now we are Kentucky Pets Alive, and we're helping a greater volume of animals throughout the state, so we're not limiting ourselves. So my presentation today, can everybody see it? Mike, is addressing the issue of animals that may not have the opportunity to leave the shelter. So I raised the question to everyone in animal rescue: why don't all animals that enter shelters have the same chance to leave alive?
Sorry to interrupt, Kelly. We can't see your screen.
You can't see it. Okay, that's what I was afraid of.
As I said, you know, this is live, and it's our first time doing it, so no surprise that we may have some technical bumps. There we go, Kelly.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, guys. So as I said, my first question posed to everyone out there is: why don't all that enter the shelters have the same opportunity to leave alive? There are many shelters out there that claim to be no-kill or advertise as being no-kill, and they'll say, but we save 90% of the animals. And my question to those shelters is, what about the remaining? And you often get, well, they're not adoptable, or we are no-kill because we do save 90%. Well, 90% is good. I'm not saying it isn't good. I'm saying there is still a 10% of the animals that aren't leaving. So for every 9 animal or every 10 animals that leave the shelter, there's one that's not going to be able to leave. And what constitutes that 10%, and why aren't they leaving alive? So when you start to look at the ones that potentially are not leaving alive, are the neonates that enter the shelter without mothers. And the first excuse is, well, we don't have anybody that can bottle feed, or they're too young, they'll never have a chance. So we get a nursing mom in, so we have the neonates, and we have a mother, so now what's the excuse? Well, nobody wants to take a mom and babies, and if the mother stays here with the babies, everybody will get sick. You have the dogs that come in with diarrhea, and they may be tested or they may not be tested. A lot of times they'll have diarrhea, and if it's bloody, automatic, oh, they have parvo, we got to put it down. We can't put it in our shelter. They'll spread to everybody. Mass epidemic. Some of them may just have a bad case of worms, but they don't test. They say it's parvo. Then there's the class of animals that come in that are considered special needs, the ones that may be missing a limb, missing eyes, be diabetic, those type of things. And immediately they'll come up with, well, we don't have the equipment or the means to take care of these animals. There's the ones that come in that are behavioral issues. They may be an owner turn in and say, they don't get along with my other animal, or they don't get along with the neighbor's dog, or, for instance, a cat. Well, I wanted a cat that could cuddle. This one bites me every time it I try to pick it up. So doesn't play well with others, may show teeth upon entry into the shelter for various reasons, which there is going to be a presentation, I think right after mine, about assessing dogs. So I won't belabor that point. I'll leave that to the experts. Then there's the other issue that is very common is pity. It's a pit bull. It looks like a pit bull. So some states, some counties actually have bans on pit bulls. Some shelters will put down a pit bull upon entry. Doesn't matter their temperament, doesn't matter age. The breed determines whether they make it out of the shelter alive or not. There's the issue of color. And many times when we were acting as volunteers with the shelter, was not uncommon to get a whole litter of kittens, same color in. This litter was the largest that I ever encountered, 9 solid black kittens. Some shelters would say, oh, they'll never get adopted, they're black, or we have a whole shelter of black kittens. They're young, they don't have a chance, so we'll go ahead and let them go. In other words, kill them. There's the seniors. Many people will come into a shelter and look at the seniors and say, oh, it's not fair for a senior to be in the shelter, so we should probably just go ahead and let them go. They've had a good life. They don't deserve to be in the shelter. Let the puppies live. They haven't had a chance. They're the ones that come into the shelter. Some shelters do test for feline leukemia, heartworm, feline AIDS, for bloodborne diseases, and will automatically euthanize upon diagnosis of any of those. They're the kittens that come in, a lot of times in cats, young cats with severe flea infestation and flea anemia. Instead of trying to treat the anemia or get rid of the fleas, automatic killing upon entry. Fear issues, whether it be dog, cat, rabbit. Then there's the classification of animals that come in broken or injured. The x-ray that is on the screen right now with the leg that's severely broken, that cat was actually walking on that leg. And in most shelters would have been put down because, look at it, needs extra work, needs extra care, doesn't fit our criteria as adoptable. The cat on the right, Good Samaritan, found, hit by car, 12 surgeries later, he is adopted, but when they tested him on intake, he was FIV positive, so they were going to let him go because of the FIV. There's the group of animals that come in healthy and then acquire a nosocomial infection at the shelter. Respiratory infections very common amongst cats, and once they're diagnosed or start showing symptoms, easier in their mind to go ahead and let them go and justify they were sick so they weren't adoptable. So the question to the listeners and the viewers, so with that 10%, do we treat them or do we kill them? And you look at these horrific pictures right here, and on intake it would probably be easy for some people in the shelter world to say, oh my God, look at that beagle. Let's just go ahead and humanely let him go. That beagle had been walking around for days with that bear trap on his head, and before some Good Samaritan called and brought him in, we sedated him, took wire cutters, took the bear trap off, and he was walking and eating an hour afterwards. The cat on the right was actually an abused cat that had caustic acid poured on him, and he's actually my personal cat now. Very simple. None of these, either one of these required a lot of care. It just took somebody to say, no, we are not going to kill them. So what does it take to save the remaining 10% or to address that 10% population? Number one, it takes compassion. It takes somebody to say, this is a life and it does matter. So the cat's out of the bag. We can save the other 10%. So what kind of degree do you have to have in order to step into this role of saving? You don't need a degree. Some of the most successful people in the rescue world have no background, no shelter experience. All it takes is somebody to take a stance and say, this is not acceptable. Take killing off the table, and you will be able to find alternatives. If you don't have that option of killing, you will find an option. So people will say, but the 10% costs so much money. There's got to be a way out there that doesn't cost money. It's going to make that's going to force me to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Well, here's an example. Here's a kitten that was brought to the shelter that had no abdominal wall, and all he needed was a patch. Well, the patch cost anywhere between $1,600 and $3,000. Trying to raise that kind of money in a short order was not very successful. But one volunteer mentioned it to a coworker who just happened to know a Johnson & Johnson rep, and the next day that patch was donated. That kitten survived surgery. That's actually him up playing 12 hours after surgery. He went on to get adopted, and I see him very often. We hear so often, and in lectures that I've done at various shelters, and the first thing is, well, there's no one like you. There's no one that can do this. There are a lot of people out there that can do this. There's not one class of people that are qualified, just one class to do this. There's bathers, there's groomers that can come in and help. There's grocery shoppers, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, schools, your bunco players, your poker players, nursing homes. If you put out there and reach out to these groups, there are animal lovers everywhere. So it's not just the animal rescue people on Facebook or the volunteers that come to the shelter. I guarantee you, if you put out this picture at a local school, at a grocery store, at a nursing home, and say, need help with puppy pads, need help with foster, we need money, that picture would generate a lot of interest and support. You need to open your eyes and think outside the box. It's very easy in the rescue world to focus on the negative. Just like in my line of work, people will say, how can you do that? You work with dying children. It's not all bad. There are good things. People are good. And if you assume that all people are bad, then you've cut out the majority of people that are going to help you. They can't help you if you don't ask. They aren't mind readers. You need to toot your own horn. If you don't tell people what you're doing and what a good job, and look at the success you're having saving these animals, get the pictures of these ones that have gone through 4 or 5 surgeries and look at them now, they're playing. Nobody is going to know, and nobody will jump on your bandwagon, and you have to be out there. And it's not just at PetSmart, it's at your local church, it's at your grocery store in the front, it's going to nursing homes, spreading the word. You have to be out there. So you need to be the person to make the difference. You are the person. If you sit back and wait for somebody else to do it, it will not get done. Remember to start small and be patient. There is a learning curve. And yes, these grown adults are trying to figure out how to open a bottle of wine. The obvious need may be large, but you need to start out small. So a dog comes into a shelter that needs IV fluids, that's going to need extensive medicine and medical care. That is your obvious need. But if you put that out there, of course, there's not many people that are going to feel comfortable doing that. Much easier to focus on enrolling people slowly. Put out this cute little kitten that just needs a week or 2 of fostering. Fosters plus hospice equal FOSPICE, as I call it. There are people out there that do take in the special needs, that would be willing to help give a home to somebody for a short period. Sometimes that short period turns into years. Feline leukemia. I have adopted several feline leukemia cats out. But if you don't give them, the people, the opportunity to adopt and educate the world, nobody knows there's a need. Sometimes you just need to try. 10 years ago, putting cats in wheelchairs was not an option. It was considered cruel. And even to this day, 2 years ago, when I called the wheelchair company, I got, cats usually don't take to wheelchairs very well. Well, this is Bridget. Bridget has a wheelchair. Bridget does very well. She has no sensation from the chest down. She lives a quality life. She climbs, and in fact, the reason for her wheelchair is to keep her from hurting herself from climbing, because she will climb a 8-foot cat tower and jump off. And at the end of the day, was it worth it? I think Deacon, who is my dog, who went through several and was the start of my journey to help special needs when people were questioning spending several $100s on his multiple surgeries. Why waste all that money on one dog? You could be helping a lot of others. Well, Deacon is a service dog now, and he helps many. The power is in your hands. I'm always available and willing to help with anybody out there that needs some guidance, so call me. This aggressive pit bull that was unadoptable is now in a forever home. A disclaimer, all the animals in this presentation are no longer available for adoption. They were adopted, but we would be glad to help you enroll in our team as an adopter, foster, volunteer, supporter, donor. I'll even let you pick your role. Thank you.
Very nice, Kelly. Thank you so much for that. I mean, what an interesting and helpful piece of information. I'm curious. Some of the questions seem to be centered around how do you get started. You've taken some really extreme cases, and I'm a little curious. How you got started in that. I mean, did a Brinks truck show up and just take thousands of dollars?
No. How did it start? It started small.
Kelly, can you flip your camera back on?
How do I screen share?
Stop screen sharing.
Is that better?
Not yet.
Okay.
There we go. Good job. So yeah, how did that happen? I mean, obviously some of the surgeries and some of the cases that you're talking about are, quite literally thousands of dollars, I'm guessing. So how does that happen?
Well, fundraising. Like I said, if you do not get the word out there, you don't ask, people don't know you need. The patch, for instance, with the kitten that was $18 to $3,000, I'm not sure which patch that kitten got, but just word of mouth, and that patch was donated. So basically, we just had to pay for the patch to be put in. We work with several vets who do work for us at a discounted rate, and a lot of vets would be willing, I'm sure, to work with groups, especially knowing that when you do the adoption, a lot of people will say, do you have a vet recommendation? And the vets that help us, we always are, oh yeah, you live there, you need to go here. So a lot of our vets have gotten referrals, so long time, customers. That's one way. Putting it out there, just letting people know. Some of the biggest support we got was taking our animals to adoption events where healthy animals are, and we'd have a cage or a volunteer sitting holding one of our animals that had a recent amputee. Bridget, the little one that has a cart, she goes up to every adoption event for the last 2 years now. She basically meets and greets people at the doors of PetSmart. She thinks she's a dog, but people come back when they know that we're having an adoption event to see Bridget, and oh, there's Bridget. They throw a $20 bill in our donation jar because people see her from the beginning. When she couldn't walk, she was dragging herself, and she had some really mangled legs, so we ended up having to take her legs off. And now, she's happy. She's, greeting people. She's socializing with the dogs there, and it's a feel-good. They're like, thank you for your work, thank you for your work. And people associate you as like the angels for animals, I guess you could say. It's just a positive thing.
One other just real quick question. Where do most of your animals come from?
Right now, several counties. It's when we were with just Shelby, they came from Shelby County. And now that we are helping several other counties, it's like word of mouth. Now we get requests from all over. And once you start helping, then the other counties find out, and then they will ask you to help an animal. And then the shelter that's referring the animal to you is also helping fundraise. A couple of the counties, we've taken some real difficult cases, and while we're fundraising, they have put out a plea, please help this organization. They're helping our animals get out alive. So we're starting to get support from other counties, people.
So when you say counties, you're talking about the animal control shelter in those counties.
Right, yes. And the question about how do you get people enrolled, most of our medical fosters, I will say, are people that have medical background. We have some now by default that have become medical fosters that have done what we call OJT, on-the-job training. And 2 years ago, some of them said, "Oh gosh, I would never ever tube feed," and now they're old pros at it. So again, but you start out small. You don't start out by saying, "Hey, will you take this, injured animal, and will you do IVs on them?"
Right.
Baby steps.
Well, thank you so much. Watching your organization grow over the years and transform has just been a truly inspiring story, and I just thank you so much for all of your work. Before we move on to the next group of folks, I just want to put a small commercial out. Most of the presenters that you're seeing today are actually the first graduating class for the Growing Leadership series from No Kill Learning. It's a 9-week class that we offer for people who are interested in growing and developing their leadership skills. No matter where you are on the spectrum in terms of your leadership, whether you are an executive director at a shelter, whether you're a volunteer wanting to become more active in advocacy in your area, everyone's got leadership capabilities that they can grow and expand, and that this is a perfect place to do it. And the students, many of the people you see, are actually the first graduating class from Growing Leadership. You can get more information about that at nokilllearning.net. Well, next up, we've got a fascinating topic that relates to the way animal shelters oftentimes decide which animals, which dogs specifically, live or die. And before we do that, I've got a small video presentation that I would like to show you. Let's see if I can get my screen share working right.
Stay. Oh, here's your ball. Sit. No. 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 Baby. What's on the floor? Yeah. Yeah. You can have it now. You can have it. Go. Go. Do great. If it doesn't go, I should. Yeah. Right. I want that. You do it again. Yeah.
All right, so with that bit of introduction, I'd now like to introduce to you Peter Maslock, who is with Allegheny Animal Shelter in Allegheny, Maryland. And he's going to be talking with Robert Cabral, who is the founder of Bound Angels and author, and they're going to be talking a bit about temperament testing. So welcome, you two.
Welcome everybody and welcome to PathFinder 2016. Many animal shelters across the country use the SAFER test or the Assess a Pet test to assess and even predict future behavior. Even worse, in many shelters the tests are being used to make life and death decisions over the animals. Central to this issue is the fundamental question: are temperament tests valid? That is, can testing a dog in a stressful shelter environment predict later behavior of the dog? As example, in a survey, US shelters reported that food aggression was the most common reason for considering a dog unadoptable. Only 1/3 of the shelters surveyed made any attempt to modify food aggression behaviors and place the dog for adoption. More than half stated that they made no attempt whatsoever to place for adoption any dog that had shown these behaviors. The beliefs behind these life-death decisions are: one, that food aggressive behaviors in shelter environment carry over to the new adoptive home, and two, that adopters will not adopt and keep dogs that show these behaviors. Both of these beliefs are incorrect, according to two recently published studies that were conducted using standardized evaluations. As much as we try to enrich shelter pet lives, shelters are a stressful place to be. Stress changes a pet's behavior. Some pets will behave more aggressively when stressed, some more fearfully, and some will be quieter and more inhibited. It is important to recognize the role of stress on our behavioral evaluation results. If a dog is aggressive, is it because she is really stressed? If she is not aggressive, is it because she is inhibited due to stress? Some people feel that it is very valuable to assess a pet's behavior when they are very stressed and using stress-inducing techniques. They want to know what is the worst thing that this pet will potentially do in a home so that they can protect the public from harm. Some pets will never experience a stress as great as that of being in a shelter, so the test is unfairly harsh, and unfortunately, some pets will have a more stressful life than they had in the shelter. There is no way to accurately predict their future experiences, and thus no way to accurately create an appropriately stressful test for performance of this method. That it is in a much of a home-like setting as possible in order to attempt to assess the pet's characteristics in situations and environments where they will likely live. In a recent study conducted at a municipal shelter run under a police department, dogs who failed their initial temperament evaluation were sent to a trained and qualified foster home for further evaluation and behavior modification instead of being killed as they would have been in past years. This included dogs with, among other things, barrier reactivity, fear-based aggression, resource guarding, kennel stress, prey drive, and bite history. Some of the dogs also had secondary issues, including extremely high energy, possible dog aggression, dog selectivity, fear of men, under-socialization, separation anxiety, and reactivity. Over 90% of the dogs placed in foster homes were saved. The study was conducted at the Fairfax Animal Shelter in Fairfax, Virginia, under the direction of Kristen Auerbach. Kristen is now the operations director at the Austin, Texas Animal Care Center. Because many shelters do not use a test which has been proven reliable, it is important to consider other diagnostic aids when evaluating behavior. As example, one life-saving behavior assessment tool was created by Robert Cabral, founder and executive director of Bound Angels. Robert is a dog trainer, dog behavior specialist, has worked with many shelter animals over the years, has written 2 books, and has developed the Behavior Assessment Reactivity Checklist, or short BARC. Welcome, Robert, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
My first question to you is, from your perspective, can you share with us your thoughts about dog behavior in a shelter environment? And can we predict the future behavior of a dog outside of a shelter environment?
Once they enter the shelter, stops with your pet. And at that point, you need to understand that the dog is going to act very differently because there's a lot of stressors on the dog, the environment, being separated from its family and stuff like that. So the dog reacts completely differently in that environment than he may act at home. So you'll see a dog that might be aggressive in the shelter where they're not aggressive at home. And conversely, you might see a dog that's very calm in the shelter and might be aggressive outside. So we can't accurately predict exactly what's going to happen. We can only get an idea, so a snapshot, a glimpse of what we might see the dog do. And when I saw some of these, the Assess-a-Pet, the SAFER test, and all these other ways that animals are being assessed in the shelter, I think there's a couple things wrong with it. One is we're putting a known stress onto the dog. We're introducing wet food into the dog's diet, which dogs in shelters notoriously fed kibble. We're giving it a much higher value food item, and I think that's one of the biggest issues with this test is that it's a pass or fail. As this dog shows aggression and bites a plastic prosthetic hand, which doesn't have the smell of human flesh on it, it smells like plastic or latex. Now we're going to condemn this dog for biting. Similarly, some shelters that I worked with in the past used to use a stuffed dog, a plush dog, and would see if the dog would be reactive to the stuffed dog. And if it was an aggressive dog, and they wouldn't even introduce it to another dog. So all these stupid tests were designed by people who I think had very little knowledge of a dog's true behavior and would be a black and white, a pass or a fail, if this dog would live or die. And that's why I came up with the BARC, which is not even a test. It's called a Behavior Assessment and Reactivity Checklist. It's a simple checklist. There's an app for an iPhone, there's an app for an Android device. Everything's free. We're not making any money on this. But it gives you an ability on your iPhone to say, okay, I came up to the dog's kennel, here's what he did. Or this is what I did, I dropped the ball and I let the dog play with the ball, I took the ball away, offered him another ball to see what he would do. There's a 30-page guide that goes along with it to kind of understand the basic behavior of what a dog should look like when we're seeing these behaviors, and it gives a really fair snapshot of that moment in time in the dog's life at the shelter.
Okay. Earlier I talked about food aggression. It seems to be a big thing in many animal shelters to not adopt out dogs with food aggression. Is it in your opinion?
I lost the last part of. Okay, I think I lost the last part of that question there. Something we were talking about food aggression. The issue with food aggression is it's centered around food. So if a dog has a bowl of food and you're giving that dog the right to eat, suddenly you're going to put your hand in there and take that food away. From a dog that doesn't know any better, the dog has a right almost to protect its food. I don't agree with parents letting kids walk in and put their hands in dogs' food, and I think that's the main issue we have with food aggression. We're looking at somebody putting their hand into a bowl of the dog's food and trying to take that away. Well, that's poor parenting to start with. If a dog leaves his food and goes over and gets you and bites you in the face while you're eating a sandwich, I'll say we should put that dog down. But if a dog is eating a bowl of food and a child is not taught that they should not go near that dog's food, well, I'd like to talk to social services and have that parent looked at. That's a huge mistake. So food aggression for food aggression. If a dog is dominant to a person and is going to try to take food out of their hand and bite them while they're feeding them, I have a problem with that. That could be dangerous. But I think we need to, first of all, take responsibility that these are dogs. The only defense they have is their mouth. And if we're going to let kids walk around and be irresponsible, then I think we should illegalize cars, because my kid can walk out of my house, walk into the road, and get hit by a car. We need to really own responsibility, first of all, before we start blaming dogs for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I fully agree with the part that we have to do more on education about responsible dog ownership, especially when it comes to children. We really need to teach how we act towards the dogs. Tell us a little bit about your reactivity test. I mean, I have used it myself in our shelter. It is, I'm totally thrilled from it, so it's pretty cool. How did you actually come up with this idea, and what do you hope to accomplish with it in the end?
Well, the way I came up with it was because I had a lot of experience dealing with dogs that had behavioral problems, and I think conversely, from people who have a more of a clinical background, like clinical behaviors or veterinary behaviors, who studied the behavior of animals in a clinical setting, my studies have been all in shelters. I have not gone to a college and gotten a veterinary degree. I've spent 10 years working in municipal shelters with aggressive dogs, with fearful dogs, with shutdown dogs, with dogs with behaviors and dogs that are just really great dogs. And I took these basic behaviors and just put them together. Here, I want to see how a dog is going to respond with a toy. I want to see how a dog is going to respond with a correction on a leash, which no other test does, by the way. And that's a real common thing, that if you give a dog a yank on a leash, they could turn around and bite you. These are basic little common sense things. I hold a piece of jerky treat to give it to the dog. Is the dog going to try to bite my hand to get it? And if they do, most of the time that's not food aggression. That's what we call being mouthy or being pushy. And that's something that can simply be fixed by pushing the treat into the dog's mouth. So we see people who have a piece of jerky treat and they give it to the dog and the dog nips at the hand and they say, well, the dog's food aggressive. No, he's not, actually. That dog is just nippy and is very what we call mouthy. And it's something that we fix within 2 to 3 minutes by just taking the treat and jamming it into the dog's mouth. And the dog goes, oh, the treat's coming to me, I can back up, and that problem is solved. Food aggression, another thing like you keep going back to. Food aggression is very, very, very simply solved in, I would say, probably 90 to 95% of cases by, one, hand feeding a dog. Get the dog to understand that everything that's going to come to you is going to come from me. Dogs, we've co-evolved with dogs and bred dogs for 100,000 years. It's easy to know that they're our closest living animal to us. So they understand inherently through their DNA that if I'm feeding you with my hand, there's no reason to bite your hand. That's simple. You know, for the 1% or the 1/10 of 1% of dogs that are just, wired wrong, we're putting down thousands of the wrong dogs in order to try to pinpoint that one. It's just not happening. Food aggression for food aggression can be solved super, super simply. Hand feeding, giving the dog plenty of food, getting the dog to understand that nobody's going to take your food away, especially with a stupid plastic hand. Let's give the dog the chance to prove that he's an intelligent creature, that we have created this creature, by the way. We humans have bred wolves into developing a dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does make sense. Thank you so much. That was really great. And like I said, I've used the bark tool myself in our shelter, and I truly love it. It's really cool. You can install the app on your iPhone or iPad or Android device, and you can really go with your iPhone and assess the dog. That is really cool. For more information about Robert and the bark tool, please visit boundangels.org. I think we can set up a link later in the video description. My conclusion is there are some very good alternatives available, as we just heard, that we can use in our animal shelters. The alternatives are more fair to the dogs and will save many lives. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you later.
Well, thank you, the two of you. Can't go away quite so quickly, Peter. We've got a couple of questions. Maybe the first one I'm going to address directly to Robert. You talked kind of generally about some of the alternatives to temperament testing in shelters. I'm curious, though, when you talk about this reactivity assessment and things, do you think that it's best to have those done one time, or is that something that you do continually during a dog's experience at the shelter? Can you explain that process just a little bit?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, if I'm going to give an assessment of a dog, a lot of animal rights people are against behavior tests, which I agree with. I'm against behavior tests too because they're pass or fail. But if I call a shelter and say, hey, how is that dog with another dog, I'm forced to perform an assessment on the dog or give an opinion on the dog. The overall picture should be, if you have a behaviorist on staff or animal control technicians who are working with the dog regularly, we should be keeping notes. We should have a log book and say the dog responds great to small black dogs, but he hates tall white dogs, because dogs are like people. I don't get along with everybody, and I don't think that should be a reason for me to be shut out or be killed. If a dog doesn't like small dogs or has a high prey drive, that's something we need to understand and not draw a conclusion that the dog doesn't like dogs. There's always a how and a why. Every dog in the world likes a particular other dog, and every dog in the world doesn't like a particular other dog. So it's not a black or white, and I think that's my big issue with the word test, because test already implies pass or fail. And in the dog's situation, that pass or fail is not simple pass or fail. It's life or death, and that's really a problem. So I think unless the dog is a really severe case, which I don't think I've seen but one in the 10 years I've been doing this, there's an easy way to solve problems. We've done it with a lot of dogs. I've shown a lot of videos where we can fix behaviors, relatively simple, and then continue to manage them as time goes on.
Thank you so much. That's really good information. And I always, when I think about temperament testing, all I can ever think about is like, holy cow, am I lucky that nobody ever temperament tested me? Because like, I know I would never pass. If I'm at a restaurant and somebody starts sticking their hand in my food, my fork is going in the back of their hand for sure. So anyway, well, thanks so much. That's great information, and we will put a link out to your website, in the comments on the video once this is, saved afterwards. We're moving on to the next part of our conversation, and I'm really just thrilled beyond belief to welcome back to Beth Nelson. Everybody, a lot of people probably know, we used to do Animal Wise Radio every Sunday. She was the producer, the brains behind the show, and co-host. And we've been asked to talk a bit about two things. We're going to compare and contrast a little bit about changes going on in Minnesota, in specifically the Twin City metro area, where she and I were on the front lines trying to bring shelter reform to our area, for more than 10 years. And big changes have been happening here. At the same time, there's changes also kind of a different nature in a way happening in Maricopa County. They've got a search out looking for a new executive director, and they've had, near as I can tell, nearly a 17-year history of drama and challenge, and we've been asked to kind of connect those two things together and share some insights about our experiences here, and I just can't wait to get into the conversation. So welcome, Beth. I'm looking for your audio so I can turn your audio on. Oh, that's right. You're named George on my screen.
Works for me.
So welcome, and I'm just thrilled to have you here.
Well, it's fun to be here, and some of the faces I see on the screen are new to me, but some are some of my heroes in animal welfare. It's been exciting to kind of walk alongside some of you folks over the past 10 years, and It has been almost 10, well, it's been over 10 years now, Mike, that we first met, and I started first volunteering with Animal Arc and Animal Wise Radio, and to see what it evolved into over time and some of the challenges that we faced in this community, the people we had to work with that maybe we weren't comfortable talking to or working with. It was quite a ride. And as we had watched other communities, Mike, across the country, Austin being one, Kentucky, Shelbyville being another, we watched other communities kind of come on board and take steps to make changes. We had the privilege, I think, of understanding that there's really kind of an archetype of what happens when communities start to become aware of problems in their sheltering and what types of things might need to come together to actually elicit change. So it'll be fun to revisit some of that and to focus on Maricopa County as well.
One of the things that I think about a lot in this topic is so many people say, oh my gosh, everybody in the community has got to get along to be successful. And so they go down this path of, you know, community coalitions and community collaboratives. And we did that. We did that here in Minnesota, and you were sort of the point person in that area. Many people don't realize that you not only were the host of Animal Wise Radio and the producer of Animal Wise Radio, but you were also doing other work behind the scenes at Animal Arc. And one of the things you did is help coordinate this effort called Homes for All Pets. And I'm curious if you can share some of the insights that you learned about that process. And I'm going to put it into the context, and this is where it begins to tie directly to Maricopa County, because Maricopa County, I believe, was one of the very first community collaboratives that was funded by Maddie's Fund back in the late 1990s, and they received, I believe, millions of dollars in funding for their community collaborative. But here it is, 2016. They're still not no-kill. They've had a series of failed leaders that have not made a whole heck of a lot of difference in that community. You know, millions of dollars squandered, people fighting. So I'm curious if you can give some insight into that archetype of what those community collaboratives are, you know, really kind of like.
Well, I'm sure some of the folks on the call will recognize this pattern, but we started by writing letters to other rescue groups within our community, those that we knew we had to pull together to work with, because we had to, according to the Maddie's Fund granting rules, we had to create a meaningful coalition. So we had to go to the so-called biggest dogs in our community, some of the most resistant institutions, and invite them to come and meet with us, small rescues, and some volunteer rescues to try and create that meaningful coalition. And we were medium successful as we started out in enticing some of the smaller rescues to the table, because they were interested in the funds that might become available. And predictably, sadly and predictably, the largest organization, which represented at least 2 shelters at that time, 2 of the larger shelters in the community, wouldn't come to the meetings ever. And what we were just trying to do was invite people to come to do an initial starter grant. So we kind of faced some resistance immediately, but we met Nathan Winograd, who wrote the book Redemption and was one of the first voices of what we now call the no-kill movement, wrote down his recipe for bringing communities to 90% plus live release rates. And I remember very vividly, Mike, that we were at a vegan restaurant for lunch, and we were talking about our new coalition and explaining that, you know, we had some really great people at the table, sadly not the largest group, and he listened quietly, and he said, coalitions don't work. And we both looked at each other like, oh go, well, that can't really. And he said, they just don't work. People get angry, people walk away, people don't want to be a part of it. And afterwards, you and I digested that information, and it was like a kick in the gut. And we thought, you know what? We've got to keep on this path. We're going to keep trying. We still have some good people at the table. This is up writing our grant. And sadly, Nathan's right. It just didn't work. The arguments, I can't even tell you what they were, because I think we really tried to come and to be open and inviting of everyone in the group to bring their talents to the table. And there were lots of issues, I think, around people wanting to be the one who made the final decision about this, that, or the other thing, and not being comfortable unless we had rules that applied to everybody, that everybody had to do the same thing the same way, and that we couldn't still have our separate identities as organizations and come together to do some really good cooperative work. So that was a really tough learning experience for us here. And I would say that what we took away from that, as the coalition really went up in flames in a very dramatic way, and Mike Fry was not at that meeting. I was. But it went up in flames, and Mike and I had to regroup, and we said, well, the road is still forward, and we will still march down that road, and we will meet with our civic leaders and our municipal leaders, and we just have to go out about it a different way. So that was the early days, and kind of that critical decision point that we had to make, that, well, we were going to do it with them or without them.
Wow, thanks so much. That was, I don't think I could have said any of that better, and I concur. That was very much my experience too, during that whole saga. And the thing that I learned from it is that this whole, especially the Maddie's model, the Maddie's Fund model for community coalitions, where they offer up these potentially millions of dollars to get people to the table, immediately sets people off in the wrong direction, because they're coming to the table for the wrong reason. They're coming there to get cash, when in fact, in my experience, you should be at the table because you want to save animals' lives and you've got a mission to fulfill. And but as soon as you throw $1 million on the table, I think it's humans' natural reaction to start, fighting over the money. It reminded me sort of like Survivor, Animal Shelter Edition. In fact, like one of the things that you didn't get into your details when you were talking about it, but during part of that, another group set up like a competing coalition to try to control and manage and leverage everything. And so, but interestingly, in spite of all that drama, you and I had taken on the goal of extreme shelter reform here in Minnesota, and you and I left Animal Wise Radio and Animal Arc at the end of 2014, and at that point the momentum in this community was set to really get there fairly quickly. And we had predicted the Twin City metro area, which, to put it in the perspective of an Austin, Texas kind of area, Austin, Texas is about 1 million people. The greater Twin City metro area is about 2.8 million people. And I would argue it's not, if you measure it by percentages, the whole area is not yet no-kill. There's a couple, just 2 municipal animal shelters, animal control facilities that are about at the 90% range. They're just below. Collectively, the community is way over 90%, because the largest sheltering system has a 93% save rate. So I would say collectively, the community is well over 90%. I believe that virtually all savable animals in St. Paul are being saved. I don't believe that that's true necessarily in Minneapolis, but if they continue on the path that they're on, I believe they will be there, certainly within the next year. And it didn't take a coalition to do it. It took a dramatic change in the leadership at those facilities.
I'd like to add just 2 things, Mike. One is that I just want to say that we've seen Maddie's Fund grant some really great grants over time as well. The model that they tried to build around community life-saving, I would say, has not been one of their more effective programs. It really hasn't worked anywhere we've seen. Disparage all of what they do. They've done some really nice things for some shelters across the country. But I'd also like to say that I think one thing of value that came out of the coalition is that we tried, and that we had to fall back on that sometimes to say we tried to engage some of the people that were most resistant, or most, yeah, I could just say most resistant. We could say we actually had reached out our hands and tried, and after that point, we didn't have to treat them with special care. We had to call out the issues that we saw, and because we had first extended the invitation and then just started to call it out as the data said or as policy showed, it really forced some of the institutions and some of the leadership in those roles to have to make changes. It didn't happen overnight, but it did, I think, eventually. That was an important step that we kind of had to take, I think.
Yeah, very good. And to tie it back to a little bit about what's going on in Maricopa County right now, what I find interesting is they have, you know, they're in the process of searching for a new director, but the fact of the matter is, over, gosh, at least 16 years, they've had a series of people promising, you know, this, that, or the other thing, and they just keep kicking the success can down the road further. And I think that what it's pointing to is what they really need is a new and better way of selecting leadership. And so that's kind of a plug for Karen's segment at the end of the show, and she's going to talk specifically about how do you think out of the box in selecting leaders, because really what's been happening in Maricopa County for 16 years is, you know, kind of a joke, and the cost there has been dramatic. Not only have they burned through the Maddie's money that were given as grants, but the public trust of the agency has been squandered. You know, they've been promising no-kill for more than 16 years and still aren't there. And now if they go out to their community and say, no, we're really going to do better at our shelter, people don't even believe them anymore. And, you know, perhaps maybe later on Karen can say some more about that, because she's, you know, from that community. But, you know, my perspective is that, you know, they're going to have a long road to hoe when they get a new leader in who is an effective leader, because the community trust there is just squandered and gone. So anyway, that's my take. Anything else that you would like to add about our experience or what you remember or know about Maricopa County, Beth?
Well, I think the piece that I really had to bring today was about our experience here. And I guess that one of the things, I guess, as I reflect back on that time, that 10 years plus of work that we did, is that, you know, it would have been nice to have a large group that was coming together to be the voice, but that sometimes, and I think this really does tie into Karen's piece, that each of us has to be leaders in our own way, and we have to step up at different times when it's uncomfortable, it's unfun, it's sometimes you're getting yelled at by civic people in their civic roles, but that I think at the end of the day, I'm absolutely proud of what we accomplished, and with the people who helped us along the way. I would say that our coalition was a national coalition, Mike. If I want to use that word, it was reaching out to people who were doing remarkable things in other communities and learning from them. Nathan was one of the first that we connected with, but we've been inspired by a lot of different people in a lot of different parts of this country who've taught us a thing or two along the way. And so our success is their success, and some of the great programs that that we inspired people to employ here or employed ourselves were the ideas of some of you all out there. So the network is out there, the knowledge is out there, it just needs to be tapped into.
Oh, thank you so much. Great thoughts, as always. You know, that's why I loved my 10 years on the radio with Beth Nelson, because, you know, you won't find somebody more passionate, more thoughtful, and more articulate about really big and important issues than Beth. So thanks so much. I'm really interested. Oh, and by the way, quick note, you can still call with questions, 877-799-9951, option 1. Next, you know, I'm really excited to talk about Front Street Animal Shelter in Sacramento, California. Not that long ago, they had literally a 30% save rate, which is, you know, not good. Under new leadership, they've made some dramatic changes. They are not yet no-kill. They don't call themselves no-kill. They don't pretend to be no-kill. But they have gotten to nearly 80%, I believe, last year. And the way they count their statistics is a little different than the way some shelters count their statistics. In fact, I think if you counted Front Street Animal Shelter in Sacramento statistics the way many shelters do, their numbers would be even higher, perhaps up to close to 90%. And so I'm really thrilled to introduce Susie Springsteen-Marks. She is from Front Street Animal Shelter, and she's going to talk to you a little about the revolution that they have in process right now, and also talk about a little about the cases. And one of the things I love about them is that they're really upfront and honest about what they're doing well, and they're doing a lot of things well, and what they're still struggling with. And that open transparency about those things, both sides of the equation, are really one of the things that I love so much about them. So welcome, Susie, and thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that introduction, although I hope that doesn't entirely cover my presentation. Let me go ahead and get started here. There will be a lot of things very similar to the presentation that Kelly gave, because we have started working towards reaching into that group of animals that we weren't trying to save before. All right, can you see my slides now?
No, we can't. We can see Beth. Hi, Beth.
Oh, sorry, Beth.
Yeah, so when you share your screen, select your whole desktop and then go to your PowerPoint. See, I told you all we'd have technical challenges, and I was right. You know, I love all kinds of things in my life, but more than anything, I like to be right. So
did we get it that time?
You did. Perfect.
Perfect. So this is a little bit about how have we limited our success in the past and what's currently holding us back from placing more animals and having a better outcome. In the past, we focused a lot on healthy social pets that came in that were free of any injury or illness, were comfortable being with people, were comfortable being in their own kennel space, weren't stressed by the presence of other animals, and came in behaviorally sound. We also were able to place ones that met all of those same things but were young. We get a lot of people who come in who want to adopt puppies and kittens. Unfortunately, 5 years ago, we had an awful lot fewer people coming in just on an everyday, day-to-day basis than we have now. And so our supply greatly exceeded our demand. So we found that we really weren't doing all that well at finding homes for everything that was coming in. We had to make some really drastic change in order to change that. The Sacramento community wanted us to save more, and they wanted to help us with that. So like Kelly talked about, one of the things that we had standing orders that any animal under 8 weeks of age coming in without a mother was euthanized on intake. I'm happy to say we've been able to stop this practice. This is no longer a standing order at our shelter. In order to do that, we had to look at, gosh, we know that every year we're going to get in a lot of neonatal kittens. We see unweaned kittens come in more than puppies, and I don't know if that's an unintended result of cats being free roaming in our area, or if that is just sort of a difference between the people who have cats in their yard versus the people who have dogs in their yard. We get a lot of, I just walked outside and these were here on my doorstep. We were able to reach out to volunteers who we already had and reach out to the community. We dusted off our foster care training manual, and we were able to start holding classes, recruiting people who would take care of bottle babies, who would take care of moms and litters, and who would take care of our grower feeders. And our grower feeders are the ones that are still under 2 pounds, so they're not quite big enough to go up for adoption yet, but they're beginning this process of eating on their own. They just need some more care and need to put on some more weight before they can go up for adoption. We also have one volunteer who runs a kitten nursery, and so after hours when there's nobody at the shelter, if our field officers go out to a call where they end up picking up unweaned kittens, they can take them directly to her house during the night, and they can start getting care right away. Here's another case of a dog that, in the past, we would have seen this dog come in and we would, our hearts would break and we would say, gosh, this is horrible and this dog is suffering and she's so uncomfortable. And quite frankly, we probably would have euthanized her on intake and felt like what we were doing was the right thing to do. And we would be feeling like at least we could keep her from suffering because she had already gone through so much to get to that point. We've changed our approach, and now we're looking at that going, we can't do anything about what's happened to her up to the point that she's here, but now that she's here, we can start treating her, and from this point forward, every step is a step towards her getting better. So this is actually the same dog in those pictures, her at intake and her now, and as you can see, she's made a remarkable difference. Here's another dog as an example. The old way of thinking, this dog came in injured. It's a gray pit bull. Our shelter is full of gray pit bulls. Is anyone really coming looking for them? Our return to owner rate is pretty low, and was even lower at the time. And how much is it going to cost to fix it? Where's that money going to come from? Who's going to provide the care? And now we're looking more at what's the extent of this dog's injury? What does it need to heal? Can we manage its pain while it's healing? And is this particular dog adoptable if it's healed? This dog came in, we sent it for x-rays. We found that it had broken ribs and a broken tibia. And we happened to be holding a new foster orientation, and so the same day that it got its x-rays, we were able to pair it up with a new foster care provider and send it out for foster care so it could get well outside of the shelter. Here's another dog. This one came in paralyzed, has no use of its hind legs. And our old thinking would have been, well, it can't get around in the kennel. It's going to be hard for it here to get to food and water. It can't really even get out of its bed to relieve itself. In this case, the dog couldn't even contract its bladder on its own. Why make this dog suffer any longer? And now we're looking at, well, how's the dog really doing? Is she comfortable? She didn't know that she had anything wrong with her. She didn't understand that she was different from everybody else. She had a bright, positive attitude. We looked for a foster who could meet the medical needs that this dog had, and we found that, and found that she would do fine outside of the shelter. So the next question was, okay, how do we find this dog a home? And for this particular one, we used our social media outreach and were able to find a home for this particular dog in Vermont. So some of the other challenges that we face, we see a lot of heartbreaking cases with people who really love their animal, but they just feel that we're their only option at the point that they're at. A lot of the situations that we see are things that sometimes the owner just needs clarity of hindsight to understand why certain things are important. So we see a lot of people bringing in their owned animal for medical emergencies, or people who, because of some situation changing with their living arrangements, are unable to make living arrangements that include their pet. Whether that's, the landlord didn't know that they had a dog, or suddenly there's been some disruption in the family and they need to move to a new home and they're having trouble finding a place that will allow them to come. Pet retention is an area that we can still work on, but just starting through some of the things that we're seeing, we still end up talking to people about the importance of spaying and neutering, and not just from a pet population standpoint, but from a pet health standpoint. If you have no intention of breeding your animal, and just opt not to have your dog spayed, but then it's a medical emergency and you don't have the money for it when it comes in with a pyometra, that's not exactly what we're here to take care of, but those are things that we're faced with. So here's an example of a dog. This puppy, actually, the family had done everything that they could, as well as they could, for this particular dog. They have 2 dogs, and they had given vaccines to their puppies, but within a few days after the vaccine, the other puppy started vomiting, had diarrhea, was lethargic, and they took it to their private vet. All the things we could ask an owner to do. Their vet presented them an estimate, they agreed to it, and they had their vet providing hospitalized care for their other dog. Within a couple of days, this dog, this puppy's name is Boss, he started showing the same symptoms that the other dog had. He was vomiting, he was lethargic, he was having some diarrhea. They were pretty sure that they were looking at, he was also going to have parvo, and they just couldn't afford the same kind of bill that they had committed to for the first dog. They didn't think they had any other options but to bring him to the shelter. And years back, we would not have even considered treating a parvo dog. Fortunately, our vets have been networking with other vets in the area. They've been talking about what's working for parvo dogs, what things can we do as supportive care, and try to get them well sooner. And we were able to have him sign this dog over. We made no promises about what we could do, but we were able to get him through it, and we were able to get the puppy reunited with its owner. These 2 cats were surrendered by their owner. Again, same kind of scenario where the owner had suddenly had a hardship, had to move, didn't have a place that he was going, was actually living out of his car, and didn't feel it was fair for his 2 cats to be in that situation. The white cat, there's no good picture on here, but she's got really, really bad cataracts and was pretty bonded to the other one and pretty dependent on the other one. We got them here in the shelter. The orange and white one actually has some kidney issues, and they wouldn't eat when they were here in the shelter. Stress, all the different change. So we were getting to a point of they were dropping weight, they were beginning to get sick, and we needed to make a decision about what we were going to do with them. Our kitten nursery was available. Kitten season had ended. We had some space, and our kitten foster agreed to take them and see if in a home environment she could get them comfortable enough to start eating, and we could get some weight back on them. And we were able to do that. She then brought in the chair that they had been hanging out on mostly in the nursery, and we put the chair in our meet and greet, well, in our colony room, used it for a meet and greet room while they were in there, and we were able to find a home for these 2 cats to go home to together. We would have thought before that no one is going to adopt an old animal. We've gotten beyond that. We've seen it happen. Our community has come forward, and they've come to the aid of the old dogs, the blind dogs, the ones that we think, man, there's nobody who would take this dog or this cat. Right now, it's all about, can we make them comfortable? We don't feel like the shelter is the place to spend your last days. Age isn't a disease, but it certainly complicates things for us. But we've had pretty good success with reaching out through our social media and putting up pictures like this and generating some interest in older special needs cases. Now, we haven't been able to generate interest in all of them, and we can't post sad stories all the time because people will get tired of it and they'll start to avoid our posts. So we have to be very careful about how we use that marketing tool. So some of the areas that we're still struggling with, and this certainly isn't all of them, but it's hard to compare one shelter to another. We group house from the day an animal comes in. Some shelters have the space to have only 1 dog per kennel for its entire stay. Our shelter has indoor-outdoor runs. Personally, I think that's a benefit, but it's something that not every shelter has to take into consideration. Some have only indoor areas. Our dogs are able to get fresh air, but that also means that in the summer when it's 100 degrees, we have to do things a little bit differently, and we have to remember that, you know, we have to provide for them to be out of that element as well. Also in the wintertime when it's cold and yucky and raining, we have to make sure that they're able to get in and that we don't have dogs that are not allowing the other dogs in the kennel to get back inside. We have no true isolation area for sick animals that come in. We have a few areas that we use for that. It's not their intended purpose, but we've been able to have our buildings that are flexible. Our rabbit room in particular, we've had 4 different rooms here at the shelter have been our area for housing rabbits during the time that I've been here. We're hidden by 3 freeways. We sit right beside one and under where 2 come together. We get a lot of people who come in who it's the first time they've been here, and they say, you know, we've lived in Sacramento all our lives and we didn't ever know that you were here. We're just in a spot that until you know that we're here, you don't know that there's anything there. It's really hard to find a quiet place when we're open. We have a lot of people coming through the shelter, but we have a lot of freeway noise. So outside trying to do adoptions, you're sometimes having to compete with not only the barking dogs in the other kennels, but also trying to shout over the traffic. Our administration office is our only office, and it's a very high traffic area. There's no separate place to hold adopted animals while they're waiting for surgery. So our adoption area sometimes is full, but nothing is available in there for adoption because everything is already spoken for. So the next category of ones that we're trying to focus on but still struggling with placing are the shy, timid, and fearful. And one of the questions that we're now beginning to look at is, are they always this way? Is that just that animal's character? Or is this a reaction from the stress of getting to or from being in the shelter? So this particular case, Venus, is one who we really put a lot into. She was lacking confidence and was unpredictable. So far, and I hope I don't jinx her in saying this, she has gone out, received a lot more training, and so far has been doing well. But she's an exceptional case for us. We've had some others that we have sent out for training that ultimately haven't been able to make the transition. And once they go into a home, everything reverts back and the people have to start all over. And unfortunately, we don't always find that people are willing to go to that extent. So we're responsible for the animals in our care. And we also have a responsibility to protect citizens, including those who love pets and those who don't. You know, with the exception of the licensing fees that citizens pay to license their pet, the bit that they pay that goes into the general fund money that we use is paid equally by people who don't want to have a dog pooping in their lawn and don't have cats at home and don't want to have those animals that are loose and causing a nuisance. We also enforce city codes, and we're responsible for managing the risk for the city, just like any other governmental department. We don't expect that we're going to be able to end euthanasia. We're not working to rehome a dog that's bitten people outside of the shelter and is acting aggressively towards people inside the shelter. That's a huge risk to us, but it's also a risk to the people in our community. One of the things that we try to keep in mind is, if this dog is adopted by your neighbor, are you still going to be able to let your dog out in the backyard? If we've had a dog that's been surrendered because it's attacked or killed another dog, or if we've gone out and confiscated that dog for an investigation into its behavior where it's been reported that that dog has attacked or killed another dog off their property, then we're not going to work to put that dog up for adoption. We're setting up a new adopter for heartbreak. It's also hard to compare one shelter to another in methods of reporting. Like Mike was saying, we calculate our leave live rate with the total number of animals that came in alive. We don't exclude out how they came in or why they came in. So we're including animals that come in because of an investigation. We're including animals that are brought in by their owner for euthanasia. And we're including animals that are coming in unhealthy. The Asilomar Accords was designed to create a standard for all shelters to be able to compare their statistics, and with great intent. Unfortunately, one of the things that has made it hard to truly implement that is the Asilomar Accords call for you to break all of your intakes into 4 categories: healthy, treatable, rehabilitatable, treatable, manageable, and unhealthy, untreatable. And there's no set definition on exactly what falls into what. And so in each shelter, they have to define for themselves. Is a parvo unhealthy, untreatable? Is a parvo dog treatable, manageable? And the fact that they are able to adjust what category things go into still, unfortunately, means you're not getting a good comparison of facts. For the Asilomar Accords calculating their leave live rates, it allows for excluding owner-guardian euthanasia requests on unhealthy, untreatable animals. That gives a lower total intake to compare with the animals that leave. And that can help elevate the number of animals that are leaving alive. So how does it hurt that shelters don't all compare the same, and it's hard to compare apples to oranges? Well, people judge success and failure by these numbers, by these statistics that they hear, and rather than on an individual case-by-case basis, or rather than looking at an overall number in terms of the population. Who does it hurt? Well, it hurts the management who want to break away from the safety of tradition. It's hard to be a shelter manager and go against the grain of what shelter managers have done, what they are doing, how they've been doing. There's safety in numbers. And it's difficult to stick your neck out and go a long ways in a different direction, and then you're the target from people within your world, and also still a target from people who want you to change but don't feel like change is coming fast enough. It also hurts the staff who are taking on increasingly heavy loads, who are still getting criticized for not being able to be as successful as another shelter, or at least as successful as the numbers are reported. It hurts volunteers who know that their help matters but are discouraged by criticism. It helps rescue groups who may not want to partner with a shelter that isn't working to achieve success at the same rate that another shelter is working at, or again, that another shelter is perceived to be working at. And ultimately, it's the animals who we're still struggling to place that it hurts when shelters are compared. And that's what I have. Mike, do you have any questions?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I have questions. And by the way, thank you. That was insightful and inspiring. It's obviously, I think everybody would love Front Street to be a no-kill shelter, and it's not. And the thing that I admire about your shelter and your leadership is that I know you're working to improve all the time, and that spectacular transition that has taken place so far from a 30% save rate up to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about an 80% save rate last year, 2015, correct me if I'm wrong. That's a huge transition. And you've also, various staff within the agency have clearly said, we're not necessarily done yet. You're continually working in various ways to improve. I'm a little curious to know, though, if you could describe a little bit with those dramatic changes. You were a staff person at Front Street through that whole process. You were there before, during, and after these changes. And I'm curious if you could describe what that was like, what was the stress level like going through that change.
It's stressful working at a shelter in general, I think, Mike. I'm kind of an oddball. I came in from a veterinary hospital and didn't quite have the scope. I just hadn't wrapped my brain around how many animals were coming in and how many animals were going to be here on site that we were responsible for taking care of. When I first started here, we didn't have a medical program anything near what we have now. We had no vet. We started contracting with a vet to come in and do rounds after I had been here. And I was a registered veterinary technician when I came in, so part of my job was making sure that the animals at least got looked at. If we had anybody that was in serious medical need, we had to then look at, did they need to go to the emergency clinic where we would pay emergency clinic prices, or were they animals that were so bad off they needed to be euthanized? And that did fuel a lot of our decision making. I did think that we could do a lot better. I've been through multiple changes in administration during my tenure here, and I think we still have some room to keep working on cases that we can place. We've done a lot to engage the community. We've done a lot to reach out to the public and ask for support. Our community has stepped up tremendously. Our volunteer program has exploded. We've twice during the time that I've been here had to completely put our volunteer program on hold and run it down to just about 0 and completely restart. So I'm very happy that we're not at that point currently, because there's no way that we could get done the things that we're trying to get done without all the extra help. We have help with the, hold on, the lights are on timer. We have help with offsite adoption events. That's an area that we've really picked up and run with, and actually have just opened a offsite adoption event, an offsite adoption center with Petco, and that's brand new and going well. And that's an area that some other shelters don't necessarily capitalize on. Not everybody in the community wants to come to the shelter. People think that, oh, shelter is a sad, depressing place, and it's going to leave an impact on them, and they're not going to be able to take them all home, so they don't want to come in at all. So being able to be out in the community and give people an opportunity to adopt without coming to the shelter has been one way that we've started kicking the numbers up when we first started working on improving our release rate.
What's the total animal population, the number that you take in each year? And if you could break it down by dogs and cats, that would be cool too.
Oh, I don't have it in front of me, Mike. We've taken in as few as 9, like in the 9,000 to 10,000 range, and we've taken in 13,000 in a year. Our population has varied, but we've tried to, whatever's coming in, we're taking in.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating story. Beth and I were talking earlier about, for example, St. Paul and St. Paul Animal Control. To put that in perspective, when I looked at their 2015 numbers, they took in about 1,200 animals in St. Paul. And St. Paul is a population of about 300,000 people, a little almost, so, put that in perspective. I mean, you're dealing with a lot, and anybody who knows the story of the city of Sacramento, it's grown a lot, and your shelter intake has increased dramatically over a significant period of time, and you're still in the old original shelter that was there. And so I think that puts some perspective on what you're accomplishing and continuing to work to accomplish there. I'm curious, you talked a little I'll try to make this a quick question with a quick answer, and we'll move on. But you talked about the struggles. I'm curious if there's like a specific category of animals, like behavior problem big dogs, medical cats. If there out of that, say 20%, if there's some category that you think is still potentially savable in the future that you're not yet saving, that you think you could focus on? Do you have a sense of what that category would be?
I do, but let me piggyback on something you said just a second ago. When I first started here, where our adoption category was slated to be dog kennels, but looking at our intake and seeing that our dog intake wasn't increasing at the same rate our cat intake was, we repurposed that space. Instead of putting in another dog kennel, we actually created a cattery that has Corian cages and 2 big colony rooms, and it has a nice counter area. It's a different feel. It's not walking into stainless steel cages and cats that look like they're in jail. And so that's been one of the things that, even though we're in the same location that we've been in for a long time, we've had a little bit of growth and been able to use our space very creatively and very flexibly. The main kennel that's here now was completed in 1994. But to get back to your question and answer your question about the target area, what's coming in and what's presenting a challenge for us right now, I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing are dogs that are people friendly but not dog friendly, because our shelter is set up where we have to be able to double house, or we just don't have enough space for our adoptable animals. We have dogs that would probably do fine in somebody's house that we're not able to keep at the shelter. And so in some cases, we're able to get foster people to come forward and take those and place them through our offsite adoption events. But a lot of the people who come in looking to adopt already have a dog at home and aren't looking to take in something where they're going to have to actively manage the dogs at their house.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think, you know, interesting, thoughtful, and very articulate presentation. I think everybody understands a bit better what's going on at Front Street Animal Shelter, and it's just been a fascinating story to watch, and thanks so much for your time. Speaking of Front Street and changes at Front Street Animal Shelter, I have to just, you know, throw a plug out to the fact that those changes happened as a result of a very charismatic leader. No Kill Learning was fortunate to have conducted a kind of high-level shelter assessment for the Front Street Shelter, and one thing that came screaming out of the assessment from the rescue groups in the community, from all the folks there, is that you've got a very charismatic leader who is very much willing to think outside the box and is willing to tear everything down and start over if things aren't working. And I think that has been a large part of that. And that introduction is going to take us a bit into our next conversation, and I'm going to next introduce Karen Duran, who is an animal advocate in the Phoenix area in Arizona, and she's been working for a very long time in Maricopa County, where Beth and I were talking. There's been struggles and struggles, failed leadership after failed leadership, and she's going to lead a conversation that's going to involve Gina Knepp, who is the head of Front Street Animal Shelter, who's been largely responsible for all the changes that you've heard have taken place there. And I just have to, you know, I'll get to this later, the running down the street naked or something, but we'll get to that in a second. I promise I will. And then we're going to welcome back Beth Nelson too, and Karen's going to lead a conversation about, you know, what is it really that is needed in shelter leadership, you know, and how do you think outside the box in selecting shelter leadership? So welcome, Karen. Welcome, Gina. Welcome back, Beth. Oh, hold on a second. Sorry. There we go. Now you're on, Karen.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Mike, for that introduction. I'm really pleased to have Gina and Beth as my guests today, and my goal is to actually help everyone to start thinking outside of the box when it comes to your shelter leadership hires and what kind of qualities it takes to actually be successful in saving animal lives. And so with that, I would like to turn to Gina. And Gina, I believe that you didn't have any animal sheltering experience whatsoever when you took over at Front Street. And so I would appreciate you sharing with us your story and how you came to be where you are now.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I am a complete accident. I had absolutely no animal background whatsoever. I don't know that I had even ever been to the Front Street Animal Shelter, and I grew up here in Sacramento. My background was call center work. I was in the 911 industry with the Sacramento Police Department for almost 20 years, and then I launched Sacramento 311. For those of you that live in cities that have 311, it's everything that 911 doesn't do. I did not have pets growing up. We were immigrants. We ate animals. We did not raise them and let them sleep in our beds. And I am afraid of dogs. So the city's shelter was in, I think, probably a place where the city was we were looking at outsourcing the shelter. The live release rate was pretty low. It was the lowest. We were the worst shelter in town. And I happened to be working in the same department that the animal shelter fell in. and my boss asked me to go to the shelter just temporarily to work on the business side, customer service, the truly business side. She said, you have nothing to do with the animals, don't worry about that, and help clean things up a little bit because we're going to outsource the shelter and get out of the sheltering business. So I thought, the good soldier that I am, I will do that. And I'm in there about 3 months, still, managing the 311 call center at the same time, which was much easier to do than sheltering. And the shelter manager that was there notified the city of her resignation. And I don't know what happened to me. I think everything I saw, I didn't understand. I asked a lot of questions. Nothing made sense. Like, why would you kill 9 baby black kittens just because they're black and they're still too small? None of that made sense. And I felt a strong responsibility to the employees there because I knew that if that place was outsourced, they would all lose their jobs. And I think that was my driving force, primarily in the beginning. So I asked the city to give me 1 year, give me a chance to show them that we could make a change, a positive change. And fortunately, I think we were lucky. And the city said, okay. So I drove this yellow bus and my team got on board and we kind of turned the corner and here we are. What is it, a little over 4 years later? I can't even remember now. I love my job. It is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, though. Is that the question?
Well, that's quite the story, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. In order for you to have brought the change that has started and been ongoing for 4 years at Front Street, what kind of qualities do you think that leadership needs in order to be able to make those positive changes?
I don't think it matters what business you're in. I think that leaders have to have, and not that I'm the greatest leader ever, because I'm not, but I do try very hard. I think you have to be incredibly tenacious, creative, willing to try anything once, twice if it feels good. You have to have, and I'm just going to say it, balls of steel. You have to have a kryptonite vest on because there are going to be critics and armchair warriors that want to destroy you no matter what you do. You have to inspire people. It is about networking. It's about relationships. It's about trying to put an employee in a different position so that they can excel instead of trying to pigeonhole people where they're maybe not doing so well. We tend to do that a lot in government. You have to admit when you make a mistake. You have to learn from it. And you have to make them. You have to tell the truth. And you have to work more hours than is necessary, prudent, or sane. I don't know. To me, those are important things. But it is really about people. It's about networking and being open-minded.
Thank you, Gina. And Beth, I'd like to ask you that same question. What kind of qualities do you think it takes to be a successful director? We know what types of people have been chosen in the past, and that hasn't necessarily led to successful leadership. So in thinking outside of the box, what kind of qualities do you think that those hiring people should actually be looking for?
Well, I'm going to echo something that Gina said, and that's that, well, I'm not going to yet. First, I'm going to start out because I've been thinking a little bit about our conversation the other day, Karen, and I think Gina presented a really nice list of some characteristics that I have seen and observed in good leaders that I've worked for. I've worked for some great leaders. I've worked for some really poor leaders. And many of those qualities are ones that I had actually written down myself. But I wanted to just share a little quote from a book called Tribes by Seth Godin. And thinking about leadership and management, which often gets used as a synonym for leadership. And Seth writes, managers manage a process they've seen before, and they react to the outside world Leadership, on the other hand, is about creating change that you believe in. And so as I was thinking about kind of our conversation, Karen, and you were asking, well, how does somebody who maybe doesn't have all the qualifications on paper, how does somebody who has that vision or idea about how to create change that they believe in, how do you even break into a role that, you know, Gina was describing was some kind of crazy accident? And I have to say that my working with Mike, kind of a crazy accident too, happened to be a meeting in an alley. We lived on the same block. And he saw something in me that, you know, I never would have applied for a job at an animal shelter. And it was a very rewarding time for me as well. But, and I even was talking to Mike's partner, George, a little bit about this topic when I came over here today. And part of, I think, one of the challenges that you face is not, I think we're all pretty good about knowing when we're around a good leader or recognizing some of the traits of a good leader. But the question I heard you asking me yesterday was, how do we get those people into shelter jobs? Because it's not just about being a really great and strong candidate trying to break in. It's also, I think, trying to work with whatever shelter it is that's going to be in a position of hiring to convince the board of directors or convince hiring staff or some HR person that they've got to be looking for something different than maybe what they think on paper is. And I think Seth's quote, going back to the quote I shared, sort of nails that, because when Gina was talking about how the city wanted to outsource sheltering, I bet we can all guess what type of service they would have been hiring. They would have been hiring somebody who would manage the process of managing animals in the community. But they weren't going to hire somebody who was going to look at what was going on and have a vision about it. So lucky for y'all that Front Street had a happy accident. But as far as a list of some of the qualifications, I would echo what Gino said. I would add the capacity to be a good listener and to really question everything, that those qualities are important when you're looking for somebody who's unafraid to take feedback, ask the questions, and to listen to what some of the staff or volunteers or the people around them have to say. You're not going to do everything or say everything. You've got to have that vest on, that armor, but you have to be willing to take it in and weigh it out. So I don't know. I just said a lot of stuff. I hope I got somewhere.
Well, thank you very much for that. And Mike, you had written a blog about disasters in hiring shelter leadership. And so I was wondering if you would share a couple of those points with us, because as you said, in Maricopa County, they are going to be hiring a new director, and I'm hopeful that they will look outside the box, not hire traditionally like they have, so that we can actually finally see positive change here in Maricopa County. So could you please address some of the things that you talked about in your blog?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for giving me the chance. It's, you know, the topic of leadership is fascinating to me because, you know, I think a lot of people don't know, before I got into animal sheltering, I was in software development, and one of my early clients was a company called Lominger Limited, which was run by Dr. Bob Eichinger and Dr. Mike Lombardo. Lominger, they just pushed their last names together and came up with what ended up being probably the #1 organizational and leadership development, you know, enterprise, you know, just about in the world. Mike Lombardo had been the director for the Center for Creative Leadership. Bob Eichinger had been a senior executive in one of the big beverage manufacturing companies, and together they had spent decades doing research into what leadership is. And so, huge privilege for me to have gotten an opportunity to work for them and write the software that they use for doing leadership assessments and organizational assessments. Learned a ton from them at that point. And the one thing that I learned for sure is that when I think back at those times and I look at animal sheltering today, what I believe fully is that we are selecting the leaders for shelters completely using the wrong criteria. Nearly all selection process focuses on two things. Do you have a lot of animal handling experience? So they hire people who have, done hands-on animal work, veterinarians, dog handlers, whatever. They need to have a lot of hands-on animal experience, and they need a certain level of education. But neither of those things predict any kind of leadership competency. None of them. You can't learn leadership by handling animals, and you can't learn leadership by taking a typical traditional.
Oops.
My mic just got muted. So that's the thing that I learned. So people who are looking for leadership, if they don't learn a new way of selecting, they're going to select the wrong candidates, and they will end up with potentially these decades-long experiences, like has happened in Maricopa County, that has cost them millions of dollars, has cost them the loss of respect from their community, and lost the lives of countless thousands upon thousands of animals from their animal shelters. I mean, the total cost to those bad hiring decisions, I don't know that you could really fully quantify and add up, but it's a lot. And so it's important, I think, that they find some way of inserting into the hiring process a way of selecting for the qualifications that Gina so clearly articulated. I don't think anybody could have said those things as well as she did. I mean, she didn't use the same terms Bob Eichinger and Mike Lombardo would have stated, but she covered it all and really well. And they have to find a way of objectively looking for people who fit those qualifications. And the failure to do that is immense.
Well, do you have any I'm trying to think of the word that I really want to say. Do you have any idea why perhaps politicians are so afraid to step out of the box and think differently when it comes to shelter leadership? Is there a comfort level that's there and they really don't care? Or do they care and they're afraid to be controversial? Any idea?
No, I think that they do care. I think that they don't necessarily understand what leadership selection looks like. Leadership is a soft, kind of fuzzy thing. Beth said, and I think it's true, that when you work with somebody, you can tell if they're a leader. But how do you really identify a leader in a job interview? How do you it becomes a much more difficult thing to do, when you're not actively working with somebody on a regular basis. How do you sit down for an hour and say this person really is an effective leader from that interview? The good news is there is research into that, and if they, my recommendation is that they engage with HR professionals who are familiar with the competency set that Gina talked about, because there are ways that they can identify candidates who have those skills, and they can stop focusing so much on, is this person a veterinarian? Has this person gotten the right kind of college or education, etc. So, because again, I think mostly that college education does not predict actual leadership skills. So.
Right.
Hey, Mike, I'm trying to ask you a question here. I think it might be helpful if you shared your story about when St. Paul was on the verge of making a hiring choice. And, they have lots of rules and regs in place for what needs to happen when a hiring choice is being made. They're going to be looking at certain criteria, but you and another Animal Ark staff person kind of knew about what was going on and kind of inserted yourself. And I think that this might be a real life scenario that other communities could learn from.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. And I do think, it was, the city of St. Paul is a great case study because, for years and years, they had been kind of in that, 40 to 50% save rate, and considering that was probably, I thought that was probably about as good as they were going to do. And the former director, who had been there for 30 years, announced his retirement, and they were getting ready to make a selection. And actually, you said it was me and another staff person, but you were part of that whole discussion too, Beth. Because you, knew, Kathy Lantry, St. Paul City Council president. Fortunately, we were lucky to have the political relationships with some of the decision makers that were, on the hiring team. Which was an important part of inserting ourselves into that conversation. And what we did is we just basically scheduled a meeting with the decision makers, and we said, this is our experience rescuing animals from St. Paul Animal Control and others. We didn't have a big, giant complaint session or gripe session about how things were, and we talked about the future that we wanted. And Ricardo, who is actually the person who oversaw really that whole hiring decision, after going through kind of in human terms, like the terms Gina, talked in with them in that meeting, Ricardo told us flat out that they had pretty much a candidate that had been selected in their heads, at least. But after that meeting, they decided to make a different choice. And the choice that they made was hiring Molly Linares, who is now running, animal control in St. Paul. And I will say, like, the minute Molly Linares landed on the ground at St. Paul Animal Control, everything changed. And their live release rate went from, 50% up to about 90%. And so clearly they made the right decision. They hired somebody who had never run an animal shelter before to run an animal shelter at the capital city in Minnesota. I could not have been more thrilled that we were able to have that conversation with Ricardo. And I think that animal advocates need to find a way of inserting themselves into those hiring decisions and say to the people, these are the qualifications that we're looking for. I don't care what degree they have. I don't care if they know how to handle a dog, because probably most executive directors in most shelters have animal handlers working for them, I'm guessing. And so, let's let go of those criteria and let's look at the visionary leadership skills and get those people in those positions. And I think they can have those conversations and people will hear them. And if you don't have those conversations, they'll fall back to what's comfortable and easy, which is, go down this checklist, which is, do they know animals and did they go to school?
Thank you very much, Mike. Gina, do you have anything else that you would like to add to our conversation here?
Well, I think it's been can you hear me?
Yes.
It's been really, thank you for inviting me. It's been really an interesting morning, and I have already downloaded my bar tool, so I will be looking at that. I do agree, listening is important. Being a sponge every day. If you don't learn something new every day, you have done something wrong. I did have one more epiphany that has fallen out of my head, probably due to old age. But I think it's interesting to point out that I still do not qualify for the job I hold at the City of Sacramento if I were to apply today as the job description is currently written. I have been recruited to apply at other shelters, and I don't qualify for any of those positions either. So I think advocating for change, as Mike suggested, when it comes to what especially municipal governments look for in the HR process, and really telling this story that you don't have to be an animal expert to make a big change in the animal world.
Thank you very much. And Beth, I'd like to give you just one last opportunity. If you have anything else that you would like to add to our conversation, please feel free.
Yeah, I'd just add that if you're one of those people who feels like you have the drive and the skill and the desire to step into a role that you know on paper that you're not going to line up beautifully for, one of the things that I think we have to start owning more in the rescue community is that there are stories like Gina. There are stories like Molly Linares, who was a elementary education teacher. And more of those people are out there in the world and have made remarkable changes in the institutions that they eventually work at. And that if you're one of those folks who's looking for one of those jobs, you have to be able to articulate like that kind of information in your cover letter or in your initial interview or as you're starting to walk down whatever process there is for hiring. The stories are out there, and we need to leverage those.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mike, were there any questions?
Yeah, there actually are a couple, and I'm curious, if any of the, maybe Gina could potentially answer some of these. And this, I think, speaks directly to boards of directors, but from my perspective, city council and the mayor's office are sort of like your board of directors, so there's two questions that I think I will direct directly at Gina. So question one is, how do you engage the support for hires from those people like boards of directors, city council? And then number two, how do you go about working to build leadership skills internally? And I think Beth, maybe you could take that one too.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So, okay. I don't see myself. There I am. Engaging city council. We work in the city of Sacramento. It's a strong city manager form of government. So I work for the city manager. He works for the mayor and council. So advocating for that type of leadership hire isn't how it works in Sacramento through mayor and council. It would instead be convincing the city manager, HR director, and going that route in describing the type of individual. I think when I retire, which I can leave in about a year and a half, I'm hoping that I have a very strong conversation with the HR director and the city manager at the time on what we should really be looking at in this industry for our city. It's tough, when you're in government, although corporate is a little bit harder too. I'm beginning to learn. I don't know that I have an answer to that. I have a very good relationship with our mayor and council and our city manager. They know who I am. They know what I've done. And I think continually communicating our successes and our challenges is really important, so that they really understand our business, because those that don't understand our business are the ones that make those hiring decisions. And what was the other question? Preparing new leaders in the organization, was that right? Yes. Which is something I think about all the time, because again, I'm creeping closer to retirement. I think that I have finally reached a place where I've hired some new people. I've taken some risks in those hires and in promotions. I'm looking again for people with passion, dedication, drive, and just kind of innate intelligence and vision to grow into our organization. Do we have someone already in place to step into my shoes? I certainly hope so. I mean, it would be my goal that we have a homegrown leader, but it's hard. How do you give your DNA to somebody else? And I think by demonstrating, always having your fire lit. Sometimes my hair is on fire, and my staff see that too. But trying to be what you want them to become is the best way to show that. So I'm hoping I have a leader in my midst.
And since I brought it up early on, you have to tell the story about your interview in the newspaper where you talked about being willing to run naked down the street. Can't leave without describing.
Sorry. I didn't know she was going to quote me. I did jump out of an airplane for Front Street as a little fundraiser. I had never done that before, and that was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, I think, next to this job. But I said something like, if I had to run down Capitol Mall naked for the shelter, I might just do that. No one has asked me to do that yet, but it was in the newspaper on the front page. No, I'm not doing it.
Oh, well, thanks, everyone. You know, this has been an interesting and, you know, fun time with our guests. As I promised everyone in the beginning, you know, there were some technical glitches, but I think overall it went very well. Good information. Thank you all for coming and participating. For those who are catching this maybe at the tail end of the presentation, you can find this at nokilllearning.com. Again, this is our first one. It should be saved and archived at YouTube, and we'll definitely put a link to it out on our website at nokilllearning.com when the presentation is over. Thanks so much. And if anybody's interested in attending the Growing Leadership class, you can get more information about that also at nokilllearning.com. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and stay in touch. We'll be doing more of these events.